What up? T-Bob here.
And Jake as well.
And look at you. You done stumbled upon little OTB Saints, where we bring you all the latest black and gold coverage.
Who are the Saints going to draft? Who's going to be their quarterback? What does the salary cap look like? All that information and more.
Hope you enjoy it. Like, subscribe.
We're going to continue our discussion with the New Orleans Saints. Want to bring in Matthew Paris, Saints beat reporter for Times-Picayune and The Advocate. Matthew, how are you this morning?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Look, we've gone through 2 preseason games right now. You got a win and a loss, but I really want to talk about the offense. It was kind of polar opposites in each of the games. What's been your biggest positive and negative from these first 2 preseason games?
Yeah, I think the positive is, even though this is very much a vanilla showing in the preseason that they're keeping things in their bag, it's still, you're starting to get a sense of the identity of what Clint Kubiak's offense could look like in terms of, committing to the run, stretching the field, the short time passes as well. I do think them getting the run going in that last preseason game with that 16-play drive over 95 yards, that was encouraging. So I think that's the big thing for me. There are some concerns a little bit too, but we can get into those.
Oh, what have you made of the Kubiak offense? I mean, do you like it? Do you think it's going to be effective? What have you kind of seen?
Yeah, I like the approach. I mean, so many teams are running this now, so it's definitely an in-trend or in vogue offense in the league. And, Clint Kubiak is well versed in it because he basically grew up in this offense. His dad obviously was a former coach with the Broncos and the Texans and a lot of other places as an offensive coordinator. But I do think there are just some things that can boost this offense, that taking advantage of play action, which is a Derek Carr strength, hiding some of the weaknesses on the offensive line by, getting them out in space with wide zone running. Like, there are things I think that are just going to prop up what would otherwise be just maybe like an average unit. But I still expect them to struggle a little bit just because of, this offense still, not every team has it go smoothly the first year. If you kind of look at it, like it kind of is a work in progress. And then just the personnel on this roster too, I think it could be a little bit of a bumpy ride there as well.
Matthew, Dennis Allen has been very candid when talking about, his thoughts on Kendry Miller and his expectations for him based on what he's actually seen from him. What do you think Miller's future is on this team?
It's a great question. If I had to guess right now, and this is just a guess, is that he probably lands on injured reserve to start the season, and then they just kick the can down the road. Now, the NFL changed it this year where on cutdown day you can add up to 2 players on injured reserve and still bring them back later in the season. You don't have to wait for the initial 53-man roster to be set and then place them on IR. So, I don't know how serious the hamstring injury is that he has, but at the same time, he's been out since July 24, and he got hurt the first period into practice. So I don't necessarily blame Dennis Allen for being as frustrated with Kendry Miller as he is. Kendry Miller has been hurt pretty much his entire career, more or less. And they were counting on Kendry Miller to take a step forward and to kind of emerge, and that just hasn't happened. So I get the frustration there. But in terms of what his future is, I mean, he's not going to have a future if he can't stay healthy. But, maybe he turns it around and, once he heals from his injury, he can start showing what, people thought he could do.
Speaking of frustrations, Saints fans have been frustrated with the performance of this offensive line, and rightfully so. I mean, look, Fuaga looks like he's going to hold it down at left tackle. You got McCoy and then Ruiz. Those kind of seem like the 3 spots that are set in stone. I want to talk about Trevor Penning real quick. He's been your starting right tackle, and that's kind of been your projected of who's going to start at that position. But earlier this week, Dennis Allen said they were going to give Oli Udoh a look. What do you think is going to happen there at right tackle?
I would still bet that Penning is the opening day starter. I did find that it was curious timing that after the second preseason game, which I thought it went a lot better for Penning than the first one did. Then they decided to finally switch things up and give Udo some run at right tackle. But, for the first 2 days of practice since they did that, it was like an even split of reps. It would be Penning one series, Udo the other. Yesterday's practice was much more, I think, Penning forward. They still gave Udo a little bit of run, but it was mostly Penning in there. So I would still say Penning. Dennis Allen said that Penning had the advantage. They've invested so much into him with the first round pick and all that. And so I would guess Penning gets the first crack at it, but how long is his leash if he struggles? That to me, I think, will be more telling.
Want to stick with the offense here. Another spot that has been a hot topic and a spot that people have been watching in these first 2 preseason games is that wide receiver 3 spot behind Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. Who do you expect to emerge in that spot and be that third wide receiver?
I think this one is actually pretty clear cut, and that's Cedric Wilson. He's kind of locked it down. I think he's had a pretty good camp. Now, he hasn't had like a breakout camp, and he doesn't make plays all over the place, but it seems like Dennis Allen really kind of prefers that veteran presence. He noted the crack block that Wilson had. I think it was like a 10-yard gain on a Jamal Williams run against San Francisco. He said it was his favorite play of the game. If you watch that opening drive, if you watch that long, if you watch the starters against the 49ers, Wilson was out there. I mean, Rashid Shaheed, was hurt, but it was the 3 receivers out there were Chris Olave, Bub Means, and Cedric Wilson. So, yeah, I think Bub Means is a little bit of the more surprise there. You would think it would be A.T. Perry, but for whatever reason, he hasn't really. He's been, I think, in and out of the doghouse this summer in terms of this coaching staff. So they gave Bub Means an extended look at it, but I just think Cedric Wilson has kind of separated himself among a crowded group of receivers. And I expect that third spot to go to Wilson once the season begins and if Olave and Shaheed are healthy.
Matthew Paris, our guest right now. Matthew, you want to switch over to the defensive side of the ball where there's been a lot more bright spots. They've looked really good through the first 2 preseason games. How good do you think this defense can be in 2024?
Yeah, I think they can be pretty good. I would say they look pretty good right now. I think the most encouraging thing for them is that this pass rush finally seems to be back on track. The addition of Chase Young has, I thought, gone really well. He's been disruptive against New Orleans offensive line and backups in the preseason. Now, the big question with him is once the regular season starts, does he still hold up against, better offensive lines that they'll face, and can he stay healthy throughout the season? But if he does, I just think he gives them so many more options of what they can do and what they can deploy. You can try Cam Jordan inside and play him next to Brian Brzee. I just think this is a pretty versatile defensive line, and I think they have a lot of options to generate pressure too. They just don't need Chase Young. Like Carl Granderson's really effective from the other side. I think Brzee looked a lot better than he did a year ago in terms of I think there's a lot of improvement there. And then, they still have Cam Jordan. They have Peyton Turner. Nathan Shepard, I thought, has had a pretty good camp, and he had a quiet last season. Colin Saunders. There's just a lot of names for that defensive line. And then the secondary, I think, is the strength of this team. So, I just think it's going to be a real solid unit across from the back end to the front.
ESPN, I talked about it earlier in the show. ESPN recently released a way too early NFL mock draft for 2025. They had the Saints picking Will Campbell inside the top 10, which means they don't expect this season to go very well for the Saints. What do you kind of think this team's give me a record prediction going in after the first 2 preseason games. Where do you think the Saints finish 2024?
Oh, that's a good question. So when the schedule first came out, I said 9-8, and I kind of want to stick to that. It might be 8-9 now. I keep kind of floating between those two. I could see either way. It seems like the floor and the ceiling for this team, depending on how you look at it, it's either 7-10 through 10-7. Like that, 10-7, I think, is the most optimistic scenario. I don't think anyone is picking them to win 11 games. And then while people who are down on them, it would be 7-10. I don't think people expect them to be 5-12 bad or 6-11 bad. I think that 7-win range, if you are down on this team, is maybe the more realistic one. But for me, I'm going to stick to 9-8 just because the schedule I think is still favorable, all things considered. And I know they had that tough start to begin the season, but it really lightens up in the back half. So I'll stick to 9-8. But do I feel great about that? No.
Matthew Parent's with us right now. Matthew, before I get you out of here, tell everybody where they can see more of your stuff.
Yeah, you can just find me on NOLA.com. Read the Times-Picayune or the Advocate, depending on where you're living, listening to this. But I have some season preview stuff in the works that will come out, closer to the season. But right now, you can check out. I did an article of 10 guys on the bubble, and just guys who are really fighting for a roster spot. I'm looking at kind of each of their chances. So check that out on NOLA.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Matthew_Paris, Paras.
Wow, just amazing black and gold takes right there, Jake.
I don't think I've ever heard any takes that are better than the two guys that just gave you that take.
And you can keep getting them by going ahead and liking, subscribing, ringing the bell to get notifications when we post. Have a great day. We'll see you on the next OTB Saints.